Yeah, I just want to react to this video. There's a couple videos I want to react to, but this is going to be the first start of it.
Before we even get started,
Tell him.
Oh yeah, I do not want to add that in here because I do not support this guy, so I'm definitely not adding that part into his video. Let me.
but there comes a time when we're all at a crossroad and have to make a decision. And sometimes that decision can affect you morally, it can affect you spiritually, and it can affect you financially. But it's a decision that we can't shy away from. Now, recently, Just Pearly Things has been caught up in some controversy. Why? She has interviewed avid racist and known racist Nick Fuentes.
Starting off, Nick Fuentes is not racist. What he is referring to is that he basically had his feelings hurt because her friend Gabby specifically had a situation where she thought it was a good idea to tell Nick Fuentes that Italians don't accept him because he's biracial. That's what she basically told him. And he retorted back saying, well, Italians don't accept you either because you're in an interracial relationship with a black man. Well, let's be honest here. If you are going to attack someone for being the product of the union of an interracial relationship, you have every right. And honestly, you have it anyway. It seems very appropriate to address you're with a black man. So if Italians don't accept him for being part Mexican, then what about you not being accepted for dating a black man? It's appropriate. The problem with this is this guy right here, Sarah Garvey or whatever, he is offended because he's a black man and he knows this is true and it hurts his feelings that that's true because it makes it where there's a connotation against dating black men or black women because of this. That's what his problem is. But that's got nothing to do with Nick being racist. Nick is not racist. I've watched him since 2020. I actually was a follower of his channel that got terminated, as well as I saw him after that on other platforms. But I didn't keep a continuous follow. He didn't turn into a racist in the last 3 years either, because I just saw a podcast with him with the pregame that Auntie Jenny basically showed, and specifically it shows he's not racist. There's nothing racist about him. He's simply a mixed race person who specifically may have some racial identity issues, but a lot of mixed race people do. Who specifically prefers to be in relationship with white people. I totally understand that. Some people prefer white American people, and as people of color, we should understand that because many of us have that preference as well. You shouldn't be hurt just because he said something that is true. There is connotation for some Italian people, Italian women, and Italian men, and white people in general who interracially date. Just like there's connotation against people who are biracial, for that matter. So, yeah, that's a lie. That's the first of his lies. And, yeah, that's not actually true that he is racist. He specifically said he's not racist. And he specifically said he is not a white supremacist, of which he can never be a white supremacist because he's not white to begin with. He's mixed race. Anyway, continue.
He is also an anti-Semite. What did Pearl do when she interviewed him? What she done was that she laughed with him and seems to agree with a lot of his points.
We'll talk about instances of when they initially freed the slaves, there were some slaves that felt so indebted to their owners that they would travel across states to pay them back, and they actually had a really good relationship with them.
Now, if she had said some of these things.
So first, starting off, Nick Fuentes, if you look at his beliefs, he believes that the country should be ruled by Christian law, basically. Basically, he's a Christian nationalist, I guess you could say. He's in favor of Christians, Christian people, basically making this country a Christian country. Some Christians are for that, and that's not racist, not anti-Semitic. It's just having a preference for your country having your particular religious preferences. I personally do not agree with that. I believe in freedom of religion, in this country being secular. But it's definitely not racist, and it's not anti-Semitic. The fact that he may have some issues with Jewish people, I think more so relates to how they are a part of this country, how they can have rights equal to Christians, as well as not just rights, but they can take political power in America, basically. And I'm not saying in a conspiracy sense, though I do think that some people believe in that too, but I'm saying that's their opinion on that. And to me, I think if you believe in a Christian country, wouldn't you not want people of other faiths to have political power of any sort? Because you want a Christian country. I mean, that kind of goes with it hand in hand. It's not racist, it's not anti-Semitic, it's the fact that you want a Christian country. So that's all I wanted to say there. Continue.
About the Jewish community, she would have been cancelled in a hot minute.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that you would say it's a good thing to cancel people because they hurt your feelings, to silence them because they hurt your feelings, to take away their right to freedom of speech because they hurt your feelings, to dictate who someone else can have on their own platform that you have nothing to do with, because they hurt your feelings. That's very narcissistic. And you claim to be for freedom of speech and that you aren't a snowflake, but you are showing that you are exactly a snowflake right here. You're saying that people need to be canceled because they hurt your feelings, because they mentioned something that made you feel insecure and uncomfortable with the fact of black men, with the fact of being a black man. Anyway, continue.
Kyrie Irving asked Kanye West. Now, this isn't about the Jewish community. This is about us. Okay? And so after that interview, Pearl decided to make an apology video, which was, in my personal point of view, disingenuous and a PR stunt. And all in all, it came from a place of deception.
Guys, people say that stuff about me. They say I'm sexist. They say I'm a misogynist. And, I really just like to give people the benefit of the doubt when I interview them. I don't go into interviews trying to interrogate someone. I just more try to listen and see where they're coming from. In hindsight, that wasn't smart. And in hindsight, I should have had someone, maybe Sarah Garvey, maybe another content creator that could have pushed back more and really was more educated on the topics that he was talking about than I was, because I certainly was not an expert in any of the stuff that he was talking about.
Now, I've been on social media for a while.
I don't think it was deceptive in the sense that she's racist and she's trying to hide it. I think that she was trying to specify that she was not trying to offend anyone, and I believe that. I feel like her apologizing didn't do anything, so she might well have not. You guys were going to be butthurt no matter what. It wasn't worth it. Anyway, that's my perspective on that. Continue.
And I have done interviews with the likes of Tommy Robinson, Sargon of Akkad, politicians like Lee Jasper, and also Lin May, and people from the music industry like Soul Solid, Mega Man to be exact. Now, Pearl was reacting to my content prior to coming to the UK. And so when she came to the UK, I was very interested in the content that she would actually put out. And it just so happened that she was putting out content that I was interested in. similar to what the late great Kevin Samuels actually put out. And I understand it because I myself had been embroiled in court cases and things of that nature when it comes to the mother of my son, and understand that the gynocentric order in which we live in is something that needs to be spoken about. So when she came to London, she said that she wanted to make a podcast, and I said, no problem, okay, let's talk about it. And I decided to feature on her show. Now, when I featured on her show, because of my following in the UK, people would tune in. So essentially, I helped Pearl grow her channel, okay?
And that's why you're angry. You're angry because, specifically, you're upset because you feel like you grew her channel, and then she ended up having someone you didn't like on her channel. Not realizing when you help someone grow their channel, you still don't dictate what they do on their channel. You still don't dictate who they have on their channel. You don't dictate even what they say. They are a free person, a free individual, and you helping them grow does not mean you own them, their platform, or the people that come on their channel. That's just the truth. You're mad because you feel like you got your feelings hurt and you grew a channel that hurt your feelings. And that's why you're having a tantrum right now. You're too immature to be this grown, honestly. How do you get this big and this grown and have issues with little things people say about black men, or not even black men, about what someone else thinks about someone else being with a black man? This is so third person, it's crazy. It's not like he said anything about black men. It's not like he's saying anything about black men in the second person. It's like he said, she said kind of situation. It's like you have such thin skin that anything will offend you about it. Because you're a woke leftist who's a snowflake. And you claim that you weren't a snowflake, but you are. Continue. We're getting into the juicy stuff now.
I was on there week to week, and I was working with her based on a fee. So the tragic death of Kevin Samuels happened, and there was a vacuum within the manosphere space. Who was it going to be filled by? It was actually filled by just Pearly Things, along with other content creators. Now, I believe that the reason why this space was filled is because Kevin Samuels had a large following of black men. And these black men were essentially fed up with the way feminism had taken over their community, specifically their women. So when he died, there was a vacuum and a lot of black men looking for content like this. And it was filled by Pearl. And I believe that Pearl rose to fame because she herself was the opposite of what those men had been seeing. She was a white woman. She wasn't the types of women that they had been seeing.
What annoys me about this is that why is it in this space everybody is trying to claim she's racist, but all you guys ever talk about is her race? It's like, if we flip this around and we said, you're a black man, so you're successful because you're black. People made it easy for you so you didn't have to struggle because you couldn't handle struggling because you're black. Obviously, that would be racist. But when we try and take away people's accomplishments because we say, oh, they're white, so they got to where they are just because they're white, saying white privilege, saying people treat you better because you're white. That is taking away from someone's privilege based off, not their privilege, but their accomplishments because of their race, basically. It's racism. Both ways it's racism. I don't understand why you guys don't realize if you say something about white people in that regard, or in any regard, say it about black people. And if it's racist, then it's clear you are a racist. Not her. Continue.
And essentially, she was regurgitating Kevin Samuels' content. So I began working with Pearl, and from the beginning, I started to think that maybe this girl has a colonial mindset. Now, we all know that we don't want to be paranoid, so I kept working with her. However, the more I worked with her, is the more that I saw. She had a colonial type viewpoint when it came to black people. And I had to school her a few times on what it was like to be black.
So first off, you have to school people on how to be black. Which implies that black people are not like white people. Black people are different types of people. You're selling the argument of racism about black people because you're saying that black people are different from white people. Not to see us all as equal and just not really determine people by their color, but their character. You don't know anything about that because you are a very racist individual. All you see is color. Secondarily, you call white people colonizers because that's your view from your country as a Nigerian. This is a hateful view towards white people. And it's the same thing as seeing black people as slaves. If someone said someone has a slave mindset or a slave aura about them, and you're talking about a black person, people call that person racist because you are equating their blackness with being a slave. You're equating her whiteness with a racial slur. I don't know why you don't realize that. Colonizer is a racial slur, obviously. Continue.
And the black experience, and also what slavery and colonization was actually like.
Some of the changes that I've seen within my students is...
Sorry about the commercial.
Do you think that historical catastrophes must be compensated for?
No,
No.
that's stupid.
So then, I'm not saying, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing.
Yeah.
So then, how come there were groups of people that got compensation? For
Okay.
instance, like Jewish people, Chinese people, Japanese people with the bonds. Like there were groups of people who got compensated.
I don't know.
So it wasn't fair.
What? Well, I'm talking about like when I think about group, I think about reparations. So I don't. I mean, maybe if the people were still alive today, like I don't know, maybe. But
First off, on the reparations thing, how the fuck are you going to be talking about reparations as a freaking African? I freaking hate when Africans act like this. Like, you are a freaking victim. You aren't a freaking victim. You are freaking the culprit more than anybody else. And to be blaming white people just as a large race to not even notice or to distinguish them is racism in itself. The idea of reparations is built on racism. It's a way to wedge black people and white people away from each other. Because when we deal with factual evidence, we know that the descendants of slaves are not black. The descendants of slaves are white, largely. At least 1/3 of white people have at least 3% of African slave ancestry. At least 1/3. And there's way more outside of that. There are smaller percentages. So, with that in mind, there's obviously more white Americans that are the descendants of slaves, because white Americans are a little over 60% of the population. 1/3 of that is slightly over 20%. Black Americans as a whole aren't even 12% of the population. And of Black Americans, obviously, Black Americans aren't all descendants of slaves in the first place. So, because of that, you can safely say at least 2/3 of the population is white. That's the descendants of slaves. makes sense because most of this country is white. So as African slaves were brought here, they mixed with white people over and over again until they became white, basically, especially because of the abuse that occurred with black African slaves. So basically, to me, it's like you, for one, just want to blame white people because you're racist. You have an ulterior motive, and your ulterior motive is going to be exposed soon. But the main culprit here, who is specifically the descendants of people who were the main culprits, were Africans like you. So if we were talking about reparations, obviously white Americans shouldn't be paying reparations to black Americans just because of racism, and you basically hate white people and want to say they deserve to pay black people for what? Many white people who are fully white do not have African ancestry. Many of them were not the descendants of slave owners. Many of them fought in that time to free slaves. You understand that the Civil War was fought by mostly white people, and white people fought for the freedom of black people. And then added to that is not just that. Also, many white Americans don't even have ancestry all the way back to slavery on top of it all. So obviously the majority of white Americans are not the descendants of slave owners. That's safe to say, basically, because we have so much of an influx of immigrants that came to this country in the 1800s, late 1800s and early 1900s. And because, like I said, there were many people who did not own slaves who were against slavery. You know, there's one situation where right before the Civil War, there was these people, a family, plus a couple other white people who were from the North who constantly fought against slavery and tried to push laws to abolish it. And it came to a point where some people actually lost their lives in like a previous situation where they tried to kind of get a rebel situation for the slaves so then they could be free from their slave owners. So, I mean, there were small skirmishes like that. It wasn't a black versus white situation. It never was. So, that's why I'm just trying to point all this out, because you're trying to create black versus white, but that's not the case. That's just a lie that you make up to distract from the fact that you are literally the descendant of people who sold African slaves to America. Most of you Nigerians are. And you have a vendetta against white people for a reason you're going to mention soon in this video. Added to that, I just wanted to also point out that if reparations were ever paid, it would apply to white and black Americans, and if anyone would pay pain, it would be your African people who are loud, proud, and very abusive to black Americans for slavery. To this day, you guys will try to talk poorly about black American people for being the descendants of slaves. So I'm just pointing that out. You guys are the biggest culprits. You guys are proud of what you did. Shameful things you did because some of you people in your past, in your history, were disgusting people. Just saying. I mean, it's disgusting to try and sell people to a country for slavery and knowing they're going to be tortured. You see how they're being tortured on the way there. You guys were heartless animals, honestly. Anyone who does that is a heartless animal. Just saying. Continue.
Like, when you said historical, I thought you meant like in the past,
In the
not the
past.
present.
Yeah, so like in the past, so like people talk about slavery. So in the past, you know, the Holocaust happened in the past, you know, Japanese, but people got compensated for it.
Yeah.
There's a book, right, called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And when you read that book, you realize that the whole Industrial Revolution and stuff like that was started because of the colonization. And you just think, well, if you didn't do that, then you wouldn't be as successful.
Sorry, I'm eating popcorn. So, yeah, exactly. That is why you always want to say colonizers and act negatively towards white people. Because you have a narcissistic view. You think that because your country was weak and couldn't protect itself, that was someone else's problem. It wasn't anyone's problem that you could not protect your own interests. That's an Africa's problem, not Europe's problem. Nowadays, everybody's trying to act like all the countries are supposed to be one big country and we're all supposed to have the same interests for other countries. That's not how it works in the real world. You know, it makes sense that people would have an interest in their own country and not yours, because they're not from whatever country you're from in Africa. That's just the truth. Continue.
So, what do you mean by the colonization?
So the colonization of Africa, so both the people and the resources, right? There's a direct correlation between the colonization of Africa and the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
And so with all the metals and the rubber and all this kind of stuff coming from Africa, it fueled the Industrial Revolution of the West.
Wait, so you're saying like in Africa, when you say colonize, you're saying like did England come in and colonize?
Yeah, like so European, France, Spain, Portugal, England.
And they like enslaved Africans, and that's what you're saying. Okay.
So they enslaved and at least colonized the continent.
Okay.
So when you colonize a continent and then you take ownership of the resources, you're able to gather those resources together and use them to your own benefit.
Right.
And so you gather those resources, use them to your own benefit, and build up your economy, all the while messing up the economy of that actual country.
Yeah, that's none of anyone's business besides Africa's. It is what it is. I don't understand why they don't realize that. Did anyone have Europe's interests? No. I don't think Africa, Nigeria, did Nigeria have interest in how strong England was, Britain was? Did they have an understanding that, Britain was going to be, should be protected, or, how to keep Britain from being attacked by France or Spain or whoever else? No. Of course not. The reason why is because Britain's interest and the UK's interest is UK's interest. Nigeria wasn't supposed to be concerned about the UK's interests or their ability to protect themselves. The fact that Nigeria couldn't protect themselves was a Nigeria problem. It just was. Your country wasn't strong enough. It's simple.
So that video was filmed in 2022. And in that video, what you saw was me attempting to tell Pearl and show Pearl what colonization was like. How people went to another group of people and took their resources and took what was theirs and built their empire off of it. So when Pearl now plays like she doesn't know what colonization is, and she doesn't know what slavery is, and she says these insensitive statements, in that video I actually attempted to give her a book. It was called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I've read it myself. She semi-dismissed that book. She kind of dismissed that book, and then she went on with herself to go and interview a man like Nick Fuentes. Pearl has Africans that...
She should reject that book. Because like I said, just because your country, you're misdirecting your anger. You really are. You're misdirecting your anger and saying your country wasn't good enough. I think the reason that is because you don't live in your natural country. You don't live in the country you're from because it wasn't good enough for you. And it hurts your feelings that your country was not good enough for you to live there, to stay there, to build a life there. And so you take it out on someone else. When the reality is your country wasn't good enough because they didn't make themselves good enough. They didn't make themselves good enough to protect themselves from colonization. You see, the UK was able to protect themselves from colonization of other European countries. So they were not colonized. Therefore, they made a better country for their people to live and flourish. And you can say that for the African people, like in Nigeria, and like in Ghana, or like Mali, or whatever other country, which, by the way, what is an African country when it's all been split up, and then, you weren't the countries you were before the colonization, so who really cares about the names? But the point is, to me, it's like you're taking your anger of your country not being good enough to live there on other countries who have their interests in their countries, and they did right by their people. You should be happy that they allow you to live there. You should be grateful, appreciative, not hateful to the people that live in those countries. People who are hostile and hateful to the native people in the countries that actually let you in and let you basically prosper in their countries, a good thanks and a good give back to that country is gratitude. But you don't have any gratitude. Instead, you have all blame for what your country did, for what your country lacks. You should have all that blame and put it right back with your country. Maybe fix your country. Do better by your country. True, some African countries like Mali, Nigeria, Cameroon have had bad histories. But that doesn't mean you can't have a good future. I mean, look at America. America didn't have a good future. A good history. But we made it pretty good for ourselves. That's what you need to do. You talk about colonialism. Do white Americans talk about colonialism as much? And black Americans talk about colonialism as much as Africans like you do? No, because we don't talk about the fact that colonialism is something that happened to our country. We fought against it. We won, and we made our country better. That's what we did. We built our country up. We didn't whine about colonialism. We picked ourselves up from the bootstraps, and we did something about it. That's what your country needs to do as far as colonialism. Don't look in the past, look to the future. Continue.
Work for her. Now, Nigeria has many issues. Now, the disparity in Nigeria has rich and poor people living just on the breadline. And Pearl has these types of people working for her. They edit her videos. They make her thumbnails.
So, look what I have here. This is evidence to show how hard my Americans work.
No, hold on. You forgot, yeah? This is how hard my white Americans work.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
They're very hard workers.
Yeah.
I like how they work. My white Americans really work hard. You see that?
They inspire us to work hard.
No. Do you know what? They don't even inspire. They're working hard for themselves, bro. They're putting in a lot of work, yeah? They put in a lot of work. My white Americans
You guys should
work hard.
Work hard.
Yeah, you can.
So Pearl has taken people on from Africa, which on the surface looks like a good thing. And I guess it is. Africans are being fed, they're taking money from her, they are feeding their family. Amazing. However, with a colonial mindset, this can be quite dangerous. And what happened during that interview with Nick?
Because everything has to do with race. But you can't pay attention to everything that you talk about has to do with race. So who is really the race-obsessed individual is you.
Fuentes was that she used an age-old tactic that colonizers use, which was a divide and rule tactic. She pitted African Americans versus Africans when she spoke about how hard Africans work.
That wasn't true. She said that specifically Africans work harder than Americans. She didn't say anything about Black Americans. So you guys make up and lie over and over again about somebody. It makes you a less credible source. Because she didn't say anything about Black Americans. She said Americans. Now, I don't agree with that. Well, Africans, sometimes they're pretty successful, but honestly, still economically, they don't do as well as white Americans. That's just a fact. Anyway, continue.
Compared to how hard African Americans work. And she also used the term, my Africans. Much of what Pearl says is determined by her management, which she has said to me on many occasions.
Well, they're her workers, so. She was saying, my whatever, my Lebanese, my Polish, whatever. It's referencing her workers, basically. Might be uncomfortable with that because they work for her, but they're comfortable working for her, and being a worker for her means that they're her workers because they work for her. Anyway, continue.
That she shares with Candace Owens. So when you...
What you're saying there with Candace Owens is that you basically are a snowflake who's a woke leftist, and you have issues with Candace Owens because she's conservative. And just because a white person is conservative does not make them racist or to have any problematic ideology. In fact, I think that liberals have very racist ideology. Let's be honest. I mean, you depict black people as criminals. You say that black people are going to struggle with the police. You say that black people are basically not even really... You guys try and claim there's like a black culture. Like black people aren't even really Americans. Like blackness is so defining that you must act differently just because of your skin tone. What it means to be a black person is defining because you don't think that character matters over color. You care about color because you're a racist person. Not just that. I mean, let's not forget the whole abortion issue and how that's cutting the black American population in half. So, and also on top of that, a lot of liberals specifically say that their main reason for abortion is to keep the black American population at lower numbers because, nobody wants to see them around. That's their perspective. So, that's my thing. It's like, you guys try and claim that conservatives are the ones who are racist or have some kind of prejudice, but it's actually liberals who do. And Democrats are historically the Ku Klux Klan party. So I'm just pointing that out. I mean, you wanted to talk about history here. We can talk about history. And the fact that Just Pearly thinks it's a conservative on some issues does not mean that she's racist. Continue.
You have a colonial mindset and you have a management who tell you what to say. What generally happens, in my personal point of view, and what I actually saw, was that she began to start paying people pittance. She began to start offering contracts to people that owned them, just like a colonial master would. Case in point. Myself and Pearl sat down to have a conversation about me signing to her contractually. And I want to make this very clear.
Is it her fault that you see her as above you, though? Because that's what you're depicting. You're depicting a white person as above you, as someone who is your master. Well, you see her that way. That's not her fault that you see it that way. She's just benefiting and trying to make money. If she can make some money off of people's content and so forth, then you know, why not? I don't think there's anything wrong. People are out here trying to have a business and make money. I've seen plenty of people do that, of any sort of type of business. And they weren't specifically white people either. Some people were black, Hispanic, white, doesn't matter. Continue.
Have never signed to the Just Pearly Things network. I have always been an independent. Pearl has known that, and I have known that. And so anytime I worked with Pearl, we had agreed a fee, and I worked for that fee. I have never been signed to the Just Pearly Things contracts. However, she has signed a few Africans, namely King Riches and Auntie Jenny. Now, I have no problem with a King Riches or an Auntie Jenny. However, if we look at the contracts that they signed, you would understand the reason why I use the term colonization and colonial. Now, myself and Pearl sat down to have a conversation, and she expressed to me that she wanted to do a new segment for her show. In that segment, she said that she would like me to present a topical news show on a day-to-day basis. So I said, okay, no problem. Talk to me. What are we talking about? And she said she would want me within her studio 4 days per week. I said, okay, from what time? She said from 10 in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening. And I said, okay, well, that is 7 hours. I said, so working 4 to 5 days a week for 7 hours is essentially a day job. I said to her, okay, so what is my guaranteed fee at the end of the month? What is the salary? And she looks at me and she says, we do not do guarantees and we do not do salaries. So I said, so if you don't do guarantees and you don't do salaries, what is it that you actually do? And she said she does percentages. So I said, okay, cool. Well, what's the percentage? She said, Sarah, you're the high end, so you will get 70-30. So I said, fine, okay, let me listen. 70% goes to me and 30% goes to you. Now she looked at me and she said, no, 70% goes to me, Pearl, and 30% goes to me, Sarah Garvey. And that's when I started scratching my head. And I said, hang on a minute. So are you telling me that's a high-end contract for you? She said, yes. And I said, so are you saying that Just Pearly Things Network has other people on low-end contracts? She said, yes. I said, King Riches and Auntie Jenny? She said, yes. I said, what's the low end? She said, it's 10 to 15%. So essentially, she could be owning 80% of the content, which is basically the monetized views on somebody's channel, and they only take home 15% of the money? She said yes.
And the thing is about that is this. So you mean to tell me that you are upset at a contract? One, you do not even know if those people really are getting 10 to 15%, or if she just said that just to make you feel better about getting 30%. What if they're getting 50 and you were just giving less because maybe you're starting on? And she didn't want you to feel badly, so she basically said that people got lowered. You don't know. Do you actually have proof that they're actually doing contracts that are 10 to 15%? No, you don't. Secondarily, on the whole matter of the fact that you mean to tell me that just because she presented you with a bad contract that you did not agree with, you felt like it was too little of money or whatever, that now she's a colonizer? Okay, if somebody, say for example, a black person presented a contract to a white person, and they said, okay, and the take home is 20% for you, the white person, and 80% for me. And the white person responds in either calling them a slave or the N-word. Would you call that person a racist? Yes, you would. Definitely. Because you would understand that at the end of the day, this had nothing to do with race. This had to do with a contract having to do with money. They realized they could not get enough money out of that black person and then called them a racial slur because they already felt very negatively towards black people. They already were racist. It had nothing to do with the contract. Same thing here. You calling her a racial slur, trying to imply she's a colonizer, when you know that obviously she is no colonizer because there are no colonizers in this current day and age. So colonizer is basically just a racial slur thrown at white people. That's it. It's just racism thrown at white people. Just like no black person is a slave in the Western world. If you're calling a black person a slave is just a connotation to being black. Just like colonizer is a connotation to being white. Because you're using a historical event to shame white people of their whiteness. To make them hate themselves. Because you hate them. You don't want them to love themselves. You want them to despise themselves. That's the only way you'll get along with them. Because you can't agree with a white person who loves themselves. Because you hate them too much. Because you are the most hateful person in this conversation. So, I'm just pointing that out here. Those two things are very important. You get mad at a contract where she's offering you too little of money, and then you go and call her a colonizer, a racial slur, simply because she wouldn't give you enough money. That's because you hate white people. That's why. Continue a little longer. We'll be done.
I said, Pearl, how long are these contracts for? She said 3 years. So I said, let me get this straight. You want to own me for 3 years to take 70% of my ad revenue, keep me in your studio from 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening for 4 to 5 days a week, and you are not guaranteeing me any money. I said respectfully, for what reason would I work for your company? She said, because we have a great studio and we have great lighting and we have great editors that will edit your stuff down. Now, I may be a lot of things, but I'm not an idiot. I may be cool, I may be calm, I may be collected, but I'm not a fool. And essentially, the colonial mindset of Pearl has people working on her quote-unquote plantation for absolute pittance, when a year ago, I suggested to her to look into exactly what colonization was, and she acted dumb.
Guys, people say that stuff.
The fact, like I said, it goes back to the fact that all you ever think of is race. All you ever think of is slavery. All you ever think of is white people being above you. And it's such a shame that you could try and claim, like, use slavery to shame white people when your people took place in slavery in the most demonic way that ever occurred. And you have some audacity to pretend it's white people just because you're racist and you want people to buy into hate towards white people. This obviously has nothing to do with any colonial mindset or slavery. This has to do with a contract that you felt there was not enough money being given to you in your contract of 30%. You thought that wasn't enough. But now I can understand why she would only give you 30%. Because maybe she already knew you had really hateful, abhorrent feelings towards her. And maybe she knew that it might not work out. So that's why she tentatively gave you a 30% chance. And tried to tell you that it was a higher amount, but maybe it was actually one of the lower amounts. Maybe that's why you only got 30%. Maybe she didn't want to tell you that you weren't, as good as other people on her show. So that's all I have to say in this video. I just kind of feel like if you don't want to seem racist and you want to say someone else is racist, do not focus on their race and try to talk about how they're so evil because of their race. Don't talk about the fact that you hate them because of their race. Because all you're proving is that you're racist. And you hate someone because of their race. You think they're evil because of their race. These are obvious facts that you are a clear racist. And she is not. If she said all these things that you say about her and tied it in with your race, she would be considered a neo-Nazi Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon. That's what she would be called, basically. But for some reason, you don't realize that everything you said would imply that you are racist because you don't look in the mirror. You say that white people need to look in the mirror, but black Africans like you need to look in the mirror. Do you know that people in Côte d'Ivoire regularly rape, beat, and kill white people because they're white? There's a lot of racism in Africa for white people. It might be because they're jealous. They feel their countries are not good enough as, other European countries. But that's not white people's fault. And your racism isn't white people's fault. Your racism is because you're a crappy person who basically is prejudiced and judges people because of their race. So that's all I have to say in this video. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, comment down below, and have a great day, guys. Bye!